This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We're happy you're back with us and hope you and your families are doing well. So, Jesse, President Biden gave a big speech, and the speech was supposed to be talking about January 6th, the events at the Capitol January 6th. And my observations about this were, number one, it was a false narrative. It was all about a so-called insurrection at the Capitol, which, as a matter of fact and law, was never an insurrection. There were some people who rioted. There's some people who trespassed. Some people who were protesting peacefully. But what troubles me, Jesse, about his speech was it was foreshadowing what his campaign is going to look like. This is a man who's had a failed presidency. He can't point to any major success. You can talk about a lot of failures, whether you're talking about the border or the economy or national security or energy policy. Lots of failures. But it seems to me he's going to have a two-pronged attack against whoever the Republican nominee is. If it's Trump, certainly he'll use this insurrection attack, but he'll use it anyway, whether it's Trump or anyone else, that the Republicans are responsible for so-called insurrection. Then, of course, the other one will be the abortion decision, which, again, they falsely claim, Jesse, banned abortion and did no such thing. It merely gave it back to the states where it properly belongs, and plenty of the states are more than happy to allow people to have abortions, so they're not banned at all. So Roe versus Wade, which was wrongly decided to begin with as a matter of law, was sent back properly to the states for the state legislatures and the governors to enact the laws. What say you about Biden's speech?
First of all, it's great to be back here for our second show of the year. And I can't agree with you even more. This speech was nothing more than pure politics. It was a dog whistle to the progressive social base of Joe Biden's political party and preparatory for this campaign. There is not going to be any legislation done this year. There's not going to be any bold initiatives put forward by the president in a State of the Union or at any time in dealing with crises as we face in 2024. And we know this because we've seen what's happened in the previous 3 years. But let's just go back to the facts. Number one, President Trump at that rally called for a peaceful demonstration, peaceful protest of this vote, because he felt as a candidate, and it's his right as a candidate to feel that they're to contest the results of the election. And we discussed this last week. The contesting elections happens on every level of government for every political office: dog catcher, school board member, fire commissioner, ambulance commissioner, you name it, village trustee, village offices, county offices, town offices, state offices. They go on further and further and further. That is the right. It is the election law allows for that, because what we want is an accurate count and an accurate result. Let's not forget that it was Al Gore who first, called then George W. Bush, the president-elect, to concede the election, only to take that back because he felt there was something going on in Florida. That was his right. Fast forward, the Supreme Court ruled, and the President Bush was elected the 43rd president, and we moved forward. But let's remember that it was people like Jesse Jackson Jr. I was there on the floor of the House of Representatives imploring members of the Electoral College not to cast a vote for George Bush. So why is that wrong? And what transpired on January 6th, or President Bush's, let's read to what was wrong with what happened with the Democrats and Al Gore, as opposed to what transpired with President Trump wanting to make sure that the results of the election were accurate. Unfortunately, there became violence. No one condoned the violence that took place by a number of individuals at the Capitol. But also I take fault a little bit with the leadership of the Capitol there. Nancy Pelosi, she's in charge of that facility. So was Chuck Schumer, the head of the majority leader. They didn't take steps. They didn't heed any warnings from the FBI. They didn't heed any issues that came forward or alarms that came forward or asked for the National Guard when it was offered to them. I will concede also the point that Donald Trump could have acted faster. He could have acted a little bit more quicker, but certainly he did not lead an insurrection. This is nothing more than a failed president that has one or two, as you pointed out, dog whistles to his base to try and scare the electorate. And let's not forget, you were right. The Supreme Court decision did not ban abortions. In fact, the late, Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg said in interviews and in the 1980s and 1990s, I'm not really sure when, that she questioned whether or not the validity of Roe versus Wade. That issue
went
to the states. It went to the states, and now the states are upholding the law.
No, that's exactly right, Jesse. People knew that the Supreme Court of the United States, the people who actually cared about the truth and the constitutionality, know that the Supreme Court of the United States versus Roe versus Wade were making it up. There's no constitutional right there, and they created out of whole cloth under so-called penumbrum doctrine, as the lawyers would call it, the judges would call it, and it was nonsense. And all it was legitimizing a public policy in favor of abortion, making it a federal constitutional right. But in fact, there was no basis in the federal constitution to do so. So it was wrongly decided. It was cleaned up. It was a right legal decision. I will say to you, I think it was a wrong political decision because it gave a weapon for the Democrats to use against Republicans in House and Senate races and presidential races.
But I will tell you, Your Honor, but that's incumbent. The Republicans have to. What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. You can't say you can't say for years that abortion is not a federal issue. The decision comes out, and then say, "Oh my God, this is hurting me politically."
No, I agree.
What happens is,
I agree.
We have to have a better message. We have to go to the voters and educate the voters. Share what this truly does mean. That's what we have to do. And the National Party has failed in this. And even to some extent, the state party could be doing a better job. All of us could be doing a better job.
All right. So let me just say this to you. Challenging elections, as you correctly point out, is perfectly legal and it's perfectly constitutional. Democrats have done it. Raskin of Maryland, a congressman, he was all over the place challenging elections. Pelosi has challenged elections. It's just absolute nonsense. It can't have this selective outrage when the other side does it. And you're correct. It's just hypocrisy at the highest level. Let me point out some objective facts, key facts. We'll call them inconvenient facts and questions about January 6th. Because I think somebody has to try it. And the name of our show is Let the Record Show. And I want to be perfectly honest here. I was very upset by what I saw at January 6th. But number one, it was not an insurrection. It clearly was not an insurrection as a matter of law. Nobody's trying to overthrow the government. At most, you can argue it was an interference with governmental processes. That's the best legal argument, or trespass. But it certainly was not, or a riot. It certainly was not an insurrection, Jesse. That's number one. Number two, this January 6th committee was packed. Pelosi would not let McCarthy pick the people he wanted on the committee. So McCarthy said, I'm not going to say it's okay, you get to pick my Republicans. I want to have the people I want who can ask the questions and make an honest record. And Pelosi denied McCarthy that right, and McCarthy said, okay, then I'm not participating. So then you got two renegade Republicans join the committee, and that was the cover for Pelosi to say it was a bipartisan committee. It was never a fair committee. It always had a previous agenda and narrative, and now it's to get Trump. What do you say?
I completely agree with you. And I will say, and I will lay some responsibility here to the advisors of President Trump and President Trump himself. After the whole January 6th riot took place, he simply said, He said, let an independent commission come in and do the facts. A 9/11-like commission where it's bipartisan. Leaders were selected, members were selected by leaders from both political parties. They were sent on an independent task. They would come back with a report. At the last minute, and this is where now this is where it got murky. Somewhere along the line, someone advised President Trump to urge his supporters not to support that commission. A select commission was coming. It was coming either by a bipartisan select commission through the House of Representatives or one picked by Pelosi. I believe that that by not doing a 9/11-like independent commission, it allowed Pelosi to politicize, drive the narrative, and place anti-Trumpers, anti-Republicans who just happen to be the ultimate rhinos that are Republicans in name only for the purposes of their own self-worth and publicity and such and their futures. They were served on that committee, and then we had no voice. They allowed, it was a tactical mistake not to do an independent 9/11 commission. And you know what? Leaders look at themselves in the mirrors and they say, what could I have done better? We always say that. I always say that, no matter how good or bad the results are at the ballot box and every November. I always say, what could we do a little bit better? Where did we lose this race where we won every other race? And I think that if the president could have it back, he would allow McCarthy to move forward with an independent 9/11-like commission because the results would have been different. And we're seeing that now because many, I think it's the House Government Oversight Government Committee, is now releasing testimony, video, footage that's never been seen before, witness statements that have never been heard before, that were taken by this political Pelosi commission on January 6th, but never saw the light of day. But honestly, it's too late. The narrative has been set.
I agree. And by the way, they are releasing what they have, but there's a whole battery of documents and depositions and tapes that were, quote, lost and never found. And that was a violation of the rules of the House, where you're supposed to maintain all these documents. So
this was nothing more than a political committee. It was a political lynching committee. That's all it was. It was one thing and one thing only: prevent Donald Trump from running for office again. A characterization against Donald Trump from ever seeking public office again, and also to build their political base. And to some extent, we will see if that's been successful. I believe the jury's still out of that, and I don't think it is. I think the American people are a little bit smarter than the Democrats take them for.
All right. Let me give you another example. The Capitol Police, in many cases, opened the doors to the Capitol for these people and acted as tour guides. They shepherded them around. They shepherded them in and out of the doors, inside the Capitol, outside the Capitol. So not enough, they had videos of that, but nobody really paid attention to that. The fact is a lot of people were being ushered through. It was no big deal. Okay. Next, many of the people who entered the Capitol, and I think the vast majority, they were well-behaved folks. They didn't riot, destroy property, attack anyone. Okay. In fact, Jesse, the only person who died was an unarmed woman who was shot by a Capitol Police officer who had a history, Jesse, of reckless firearm use, and who shot the crowd, wasn't even directing his fire, literally his fire, at Ashley Babbitt, the poor woman who was killed. He shot into a crowd, and nobody indicated at all that there was a threat of any violence or any harm from this group. Just shot in and killed the woman. What do you say about those things?
What's amazing is that there's never been anything said about this. No report, nothing of anything substantial. And I believe that officer still continues to serve or was allowed to resign or retire on his own. Could you imagine if that was a reverse? If we would have rioting in the streets like we had with Antifa and Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020. And let's not forget that it's funny, the Department of Justice, on a similar but different matter, the Department of Justice, FBI, they're able to use sophistication, AI technology, facial recognition to identify the January 6th rioters 2-3 years later after it occurred. Yet we haven't been able to do the same with the rioters that destroyed cities, destroyed
absolutely
New York.
Right. Absolutely. All across the country, Jesse.
Portland, Chicago,
Seattle,
every state,
Baltimore, I mean, everywhere, Philadelphia. I mean, it was awful.
How is it that those
St. Louis.
individuals are not being arrested for literally committing violence on private property? Actually they stole a police department in Seattle.
And they rioted in front of a federal courthouse.
Yes.
I mean, incredible.
So how is it that technology works? And then it's funny, technology works when we get the January 6th rioters. It doesn't work with Antifa and
BLM
and Black Lives BLM. And of course, one of the best investigatory units in the world, the FBI, can't seem to find who dropped the cocaine in the White House or who leaked a draft opinion on Roe versus Wade months before it was to be finalized and distributed.
Well said. We have to take a break. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Please stay with us. We'll be back in a moment for more interesting conversation.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the U.S. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
We're back. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Jesse, I just want to finish up our thoughts on January 6th, and you and I were talking about some salient facts and some salient questions that President Biden, in his very aggressive, divisive speech, when he was talking about January 6th, which is a campaign speech, the man who was elected on a campaign of bringing the country together, a man who took the oath of office at the inauguration, say he was a unifier, not a divider, has done more to divide this country. And he hasn't learned his lesson, or maybe he's learned the lesson that he thinks his base is bigger than the Republican base, and he's doing it all over again with these personal attacks against Trump and calling him, an insurrectionist, a Hitler. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. But let me just go back and point out some other facts that our listeners should know. These hearings were choreographed. They're actually choreographed by filmmakers from Hollywood to present the one-side anti-Trump narrative. They cherry-picked the facts. They cherry-picked the videos. They did what they wanted to do because this was all about setting forth a narrative, a vision they wanted the world to see about an insurrection. And again, we talked about riotous behavior by some, yes. Trespass by some, yes. Some destruction of property, yes. Bad conduct, in some places, yes. But overwhelmingly, it was, as the liberals like to say, overwhelmingly was a peaceful demonstration, and they don't get full credit for that. You had some people who got out of control, but the vast majority did not. Now, the public was never given, Jesse, full access to the full testimony or documents in the private interviews. It just happened now that it's being released, as you correctly pointed out. In fact, they cherry-picked or leaked their own spin while this whole thing was going on. What do you say about that?
I completely agree with you that President Biden is a complete hypocrite when it comes to this. You're right. His inaugural speech was about being a unifier. His campaign towards the end of this election cycle in 2020 was about being a unifier. He has governed anything but. He has basically termed a portion of the population and tried to use the word MAGA, or somebody who wants to make America great again. Someone that is almost like the deplorables, like Hillary Clinton did in 2016. Anybody that would support Donald Trump would be someone that's against our country, which is completely divisive. But I think it's right. I think what's good now is that transparency and light is the best cure for any type of disease. So the Democrats and Pelosi gave us the disease of a trumped up, no pun intended, special committee on January 6th. And now the Republicans, and I give them credit, they are pulling back the curtain. They're opening up the documents, and they're letting the American people decide for themselves what's fact and what's fiction.
Well, let me just make a few more points, and then we'll move on. There was nobody on that committee who was a fair-minded person, respected by both parties, like our mutual friend, Congressman Peter King, who served as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee when he was in the House, as well as being on the House Intelligence Committee. There's nobody there to rebut these false narratives or these cherry-picked facts, and that's very dangerous. And by the way, Jesse, we never got a true answer from the FBI or the Justice Department about the role of any government informants in that crowd or any agents in that crowd who work for government agencies. We never got an answer to that. And we never got an answer about whether you had extremist agent provocateurs ginning up the protesters to try to inspire them to acts of violence. And we know that happens, too, in these crazy radical demonstrations. What say you?
Absolutely. And I do hope that the House Oversight Committee and the House itself at one point gets around to doing that, because I think it's important that the American people know what truly went on January 6th. And again, I have to repeat this because it's fair and it's right and it's just. We made a mistake by not doing an independent commission. An independent commission would have allowed all of this data to be reviewed and disseminated to the American people in a report that would either be critical and identify the failures of government in securing its own facilities and identify the true people that were the provocateurs in this matter. But for the Democrats, that didn't work. And unfortunately, the Republicans gave them the ability to do it.
Well said. All right, let's turn our attention to, as we head into this presidential election season, some Supreme Court cases that are going to be very important. The Supreme Court, as much as it tries to stay out of politics and doesn't like getting involved in the political thicket, as they call it, is going to have to be involved. So let me point out the following legal issues, cases that will wind up in the Supreme Court more than likely. One is the issue of presidential immunity. It was just recently argued in the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. It seemed to be an unsympathetic bench to the issue of presidential immunity. These are my thoughts on presidential immunity. If you act in the course and furtherance of your official duties as president, then you're entitled to presidential immunity. If you go beyond your official roles and responsibilities, then you're not entitled to it. It seems to me that's not a tough test, and it's a common sense test. The fact is the President of the United States has an obligation and a right under our Constitution to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed and elections are faithfully and honestly conducted. So that's presidential immunity. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think that this is nothing more. And, we're going to be talking about presidential immunity. We're going to be talking about gag orders. We're going to be talking about denying positions on ballots, that all of these issues are going to be going before the Supreme Court. And ultimately, they're being pushed by progressive Democrats. And I would say the fact that they are so feverish to and we'll get into this a little bit later too, to bring these court cases, to institute these gag orders, to keep Donald Trump occupied in court and utilizing the institutions of government like the Department of Justice and the FBI to do so, I think really is a credit that they're scared of Donald Trump. They're scared of the impact of Donald Trump on the ballot. They're scared of the impact of Donald Trump with the electorate, the American people, the connection he has with the American people, those that are very fervent and loud about it, and those that are more quiet about it. And they're worried about the failures of their own party, its positioning, and its leaders like Joe Biden. So I think that, in the case of this presidential immunity, I think that's going to be one where the Supreme Court's going to see very, very quickly and rule very quickly on the fact that there is no charge for the president here. That's just one opinion. I'm not a lawyer. I listen to smart guys like you.
Well, I thank you for that compliment. I'll give you my wife's cell phone number. Please tell her that, would you please? After 40-odd years of marriage, the jury's still out on that one, Jesse. Mm-hmm. So the next issue I want to talk about is the gag orders. Yeah. Donald Trump is running for president of the United States, and you have judges, both state and federal, across the country, think it's perfectly appropriate to tell him that he's not allowed to talk about these charges, which he says are false, specious charges against him that are trumped up political agendas, that are weaponization of prosecutions and civil litigation, and he's not allowed to talk about this, or they're going to tell him what he can talk about and what he can't talk about. So I think gag orders will go to the Supreme Court as well. How do you have a fair election unless Trump is allowed to respond? What say you?
You don't. But that's what the issue here. The only people who are truly trying to suppress voters and place their thumb on the scale of fairness on elections are the Democrats. They do it legislatively, like here in the state of New York and to other states, and they do it through the weaponizations of the Department of Justice and the FBI. They want to try and silence this man. It's his constitutional right, the First Amendment, to speak about the injustices as he sees it, as an everyman. And I've always said this to the American people and the people of New York who hear this show. Imagine if they can do this to a sitting president or a former sitting president. They're coming for us next. That's the way it's going to be with these individuals. That's the purpose of 87,000 new IRS agents that the Democrats are looking to hire. So I do believe that I'm hoping that this court, which roots itself in constitutional law and is not they'll be attacked because if they rule against, the very loud progressives, they'll be threatened again. Their houses will be docked and people will be told to demonstrate in front of their houses and to, threaten their security, and we'll have term limits and we'll pack the court. Everything that the Democrats will put forward because they don't like the decision of fairness that comes from the justices. I believe that it's very simple. It's the First Amendment. He's got a campaign for president to run, and he should be able to say, right or wrong, correct or incorrect, because then the American people can decipher and tell who's being lied to, who's being told misinformation, and who's being told the truth. Let the American people decide. Don't try and impose gag orders on a presidential candidate. And if we're going to do that, let's start imposing, cognitive tests on the Democratic candidate and president for president.
Well, and similarly, in the same regard, here you have states like Maine and Colorado and some other states are trying to pull this stunt to try to deny Trump a placement on the ballot on an alleged violation of the 14th Amendment about insurrection. Number one, he's never been charged with insurrection. He's never been convicted of insurrection. Even Jack Smith, that renegade prosecutor who would do anything he can to make a case against Trump, even he realized that there was no insurrection, so he was never charged with insurrection. Let's be very clear. There was never a charge against Donald Trump, or by that matter, Jesse, any of the demonstrators, even those who got out of hand on January 6th, none of them were charged with insurrection. So let's be clear on that record. But this 14th Amendment argument is total nonsense, Jesse, because if you bother to do their research and read the history of the 14th Amendment, it was a civil rights amendment. It comes out of the government of the North that won the Civil War trying to stop former Confederate officers who raised their arms against the Union from holding federal office. As far as I know, Trump was not a Confederate officer during the Civil War. What say you? And by the
Absolutely.
way, and clearly that case should be, those Maine overreach and that Colorado overreach should immediately be thrown out.
Yeah, I believe they will. And this is a nuisance, and I think even legal scholars are just shake their head, and that's where really what's on the stage, on the American stage, for all the people to see, the difference between what the Republicans want and Democrat wants. Democrats want activist judges. They want another branch of legislative government in our triad of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. They want the judiciary to legislate. They want an activism type of judiciary, where Republicans and our forefathers, we wanted those that would be fair. We would look at things fairly, openly, honestly, and issue rulings that are based in law, based on our Constitution, not to legislate from the bench. There's another whole other side of that triad that does that on behalf of the American people, and that's the Congress. And if they can't get their act together, shame on them. They should be voted out. But that's where you see here, we see activist judges issuing politically motivated decisions for a political purpose. And unfortunately, the new Supreme Court, I believe, will definitely just rule that against that swiftly. And then all these other little shenanigans that are going on in Maine and in other states, ironically New York, which is now discussing it, ironically all blue states, Democrat-controlled states, their efforts will just go to wayside, and we'll have a clear election, a clear ballot access for everyone.
All right, let me raise the fourth case, and this one I understand is going to take, well, based on what I'm reading and I'm hearing, this is going to go before the Supreme Court and they'll have a decision in June, which it seems to me, frankly, they should deal with this issue way before June. But that's the charge that Jack Smith, the special counsel, did bring against Trump coming out of January 6th, and that was the criminal charge of unlawful obstruction of governmental processes. You know, virtually every crime requires a bad state of mind, Jesse, an illicit purpose, that you had an intent to violate the law, to do something in a bad way. And what obstruction of governmental administration? All Trump said was he thought that you had a right to challenge the ballots, and that he believed, based on the legal advice was given by some of his lawyers, that Pence, the vice president of the United States at the time, had a right not to do an administrative act of certifying the ballots. He could throw them out. Okay? I think Trump was wrong on that, and I think the better reading of the law is that there's no such right of the vice president of the United States to do so. But the point is, he was acting on legal advice, therefore, and he's not a lawyer, he's a businessman. Therefore, where did he have an evil state of mind? Where did he have a bad purpose? He's told by his lawyers that the vice president of the United States has a right to throw out certain ballots and substitute electors. And by the way, that happens all the time with you have two panels of electors coming in, and they sit there until one set or another is recognized by the Congress. But the charge of unlawful obstruction of governmental processes, I think, is a ridiculous charge that Smith brought, and that'll be decided by the Supreme Court in June. We have to take a break, Jesse. This is Let the Record Show
right.
with Chairman Jesse Garcia, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We'll be back in a moment with more interesting conversations. Thank you. We're back for our third segment today. Now, what I want to raise with you is things that are really breaking as you and I are talking to each other. There have started House impeachment proceedings against Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. They're saying that he's willfully failed to protect our borders. He's not fulfilling his oath of office to protect and defend this country. And this is a very serious business about impeaching an office holder in the cabinet appointed by the President of the United States, confirmed by the United States Senate. But if the man is not doing his job, then it seems to me Congress has a right to hold him accountable by the impeachment process. Now, just so our listeners understand, impeachment is merely an accusation. It's almost like an indictment, which is also just an accusation. If the House impeaches, you still need to have a full trial before the Senate and a 2/3 vote of the Senate to remove him, convict and remove. People should bear that in mind. So what are your thoughts about this impeachment proceeding against Mayorkas?
Well, I do think that he has been negligent in his duties. I believe he has put the United States and the American people in harm's way. He has not conducted himself to the oath of office he has taken. Our borders are open. He has lied to Congress. He has misled Congress. He is doing everything that will place our communities in jeopardy. There are fentanyl coming across our borders. There's human trafficking coming across borders. There's illegal immigrants coming across our borders. They're placing a strain upon our social services and our education systems. In right next door to us, right here in New York City, they are doing this, and they do this without impunity. And the other things that's going on with the issues of going on in the Middle East, it has been stated by the Border Patrol that they believe that there are possible terrorists that are coming using the southern border to cross over for the purposes of doing harm to us here in our country because of our ardent support for Israel. I believe that this is an act that should be taken. I've always thought that this was the impeachment that should take place. But our good friend Eric Levine actually changed my mind. I believe that the Attorney General and Mayorkas should be the targets of impeachments because of their actions in their capacities as department secretaries and office holders. That's what I believe that we should be going after, more so than the president. I believe that we will be able, and we should be able, to address failure of policy and leadership at the ballot box. And I believe the American people will exercise that right in November of this year. But I believe that unfortunately, I believe that Mayorkas has given the House of Representatives too much ammunition to avoid. He is arrogant. He's
falsely testified. He's falsely testified. He has defied the elected officials that have been elected by the people of this country to protect it, to serve and protect the American people. And he has not done that. He has instead placed this country in far greater security risk than it was when he took office and took the mantle of leadership of that department. He should go. Eric Levine and I, as part of our lunch group when he has his seminars, had the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers from Michigan, who's running for the United States Senate from Michigan this year, great man, talking about this. And he's saying the numbers are staggering in terms of who's coming across. They have no idea who's coming across. And what was very staggering, and to my mind, really blew my eyes wide open when he said this today at the lunch. He said as follows, you have people who have been identified as being illegal migrants. They've come across, they're on terrorist watch lists. So somebody in the group asked Chairman Rogers, well, what happens to those people on a terrorist watch list? Are they arrested? Are they sent back? What happens to them? And you know what Rogers said to the group? He said, no, they're just given the same form to come back for a hearing as anybody else, even though they were on a terrorist watch list. Can you believe that? Isn't that absolutely insane?
That is preposterous.
Isn't that one of the craziest things you've ever heard, Jesse? And that's from a guy who really knows his business, Mike Rogers of Michigan, running for the Senate and former chair of the Intelligence Committee of the House. So he knows his stuff. So let me switch gears. There's been another hearing going on today. Hunter Biden, if you recall, was given a lawful subpoena by the committees, the Oversight Committee as well as the Judiciary Committee, about the issue of the possible impeachment of President Biden. He refused to come in and testify in deposition and to have his deposition taken. He said he would go in and do it in a public forum. Number one, he doesn't write the rules of the game about how he's going to appear, what he's going to do. And all of the previous people who've had a situation where they had to give testimony, they all go down into the basement and get deposed by staff in a written deposition, which is transcribed. So we know we have a record of that, except when the Democrats lose those records. And what do you have? You have Biden Jr. showing up saying, I'm not going to honor this. I'm willing to go public, but I'm not going to go in. I'm not going to testify. So now they're drafting, it's what they call a markup. They're drafting resolutions out of the Judiciary Committee, out of the Oversight Committee, to hold him in contempt. And after that day, when he refused to go there, he had a big press conference. Today, when they're doing this markup, this legislative proceeding to deal with the resolutions, Jesse, he goes in to the congressional hearings. He sits there until one of the Congress members saying, we have the power to have him arrested right now, for contempt, which, by the way, happens to be true. The Congress has the right to make an arrest. People don't know that, but yes, they can. And guess what? He and his lawyer, Abbe Lowell, they took the high road out. They ran out the door. So you have that going on. That's a big deal. What do you say about that?
This is nothing more than political theater to distract the American voters, but it's not working. Hunter Biden and the Biden family do not write the rules. They think they do, but they don't. And the House committee is going to hold them accountable. If he's innocent and it believes what he is saying, that, there is no pseudonym emails for the big guy and that nothing went wrong, raise your hand, go into the deposition like many of us have done before for either minor cases or major cases and speak the truth. Or scared about doing that.
Or if you think you can incriminate yourself, take the Fifth Amendment. You have a right to do that too.
Maybe that's the issue, Your Honor. Maybe that's the issue. That they don't want. They know that perhaps they know the Republicans won't do it in public because they want to do it the proper way by doing a deposition the way depositions are held and have been held for years and years and since the beginning of time. So he knows that he can do this because he's scared. Number one, that he's going to be placed in a position where he's going to have to lie, or he's going to plead the Fifth, which is devastating to the Biden administration.
I agree with that, Jesse. Now, let me turn to another breaking story about Mr. Hunter Biden. He's a great artist, Jesse. I don't know if you know that. I mean, he's as good as...
I heard.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. His works of art are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, which he's collected for individual paintings. I mean, he's as good as Monet and Van Gogh and Degas, Picasso. I mean, the guy's remarkable. I just don't understand why you and I weren't running to buy one of his paintings for a few $100,000. Besides the fact we're
not part of that elite group.
Well, first of all, I guess we don't have a few $100,000.
This is true, or anything before the federal government that we need assistance with.
Right, that's right. So, what do you think happened? It now turns out the curator, the gallerist, who was doing the sales. Remember, the Biden administration made a big showing. They had press conferences and they had remarks from the podium saying, "Well, we have ethical guidelines, and we'll never know who paid for this. They have a right to confidentiality." First of all, they don't have a right to confidentiality. When you buy a painting at a gallery, you don't have a right of confidentiality. This is not attorney-client privilege. This is not doctor-patient privilege. This is not priest-penitent privilege. This is not privilege between spouses. This is a guy buying a painting from an art gallery. So give me a break about Hunter Biden's customers' purchase of his art, not having to reveal the names. But now it's been revealed in testimony before the House. Guess what, Jesse? 70% of the people who bought the art were people who had political, personal, or governmental interests with the Biden administration. Okay? So there. And where's the honesty there? Where's the transparency there from the Biden administration? Jesse, we have to take a break. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We'll be back in a few moments for a final segment of today's Let the Record Show. Please stay with us. We're back for the final segment of today's Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Jesse, don't you think it's about time for the Congress of the United States to act responsibly and to do the right thing to fund border protection for the United States border so we can have a secure country? Don't you think it's time for the Congress of the United States to fund the Ukraine so they can fight against Putin's adventurism and aggression and protect other European and Eastern European states from potential acts of war or violence by Putin's Russia? And don't you think it's about time they gave the aid to Israel so Israel could fight to protect Western civilization. Because remember, Israel is not fighting just for Israel's survival, and it is an existential threat, but they're also fighting, Jesse, in very real terms for Western civilization, because the extreme Islamic fundamentalists, the Hamas types, the Hezbollah types, they've made the Islamic Jihad types, the Houthis have made it very, very clear that the Jewish population of Israel and the state of Israel are just the first step in the road to world domination. Europe is next, and then comes the United States. What say you?
I do believe that these conflicts that are being fought right now are better being fought. They're being, in part, there are battles that are being fought in faraway lands instead of on our own shores. I do believe that we do need to provide our allies with the funding required to defend themselves in Israel, of course, to address terrorists and a terrorist attack similar, if not similar to that we experienced here in 9/11. We should not be telling Israel how they should defend themselves from a terrorist attack, just like the United States did not want to hear from other countries on how we should have defended ourselves and taken action when terror was brought to our shores. I do believe that these fundings are right and just, and that they should move forward. But they need to be moved forward with a few caveats there. Number one, I do think that all three bills should stand on their own and face a yay or nay vote on their own merits. And when it comes to Ukraine, because of the corruption that has been swirling around this country for many, many years, the connections with the Biden family, the connections with Democrats, the fact that we know that for every dollar that is American dollar being spent there to defend, to fight this war, that there is a significant percentage, almost half of it being skimmed off by corrupt politicians and corrupt operators. We need to have more accountability if we're going to send American tax dollars there to do it. And on the border, I think that we need to put politics aside. Politics be damned. If the policies of Donald Trump worked, they secured this border, they curtailed illegal immigration. We had a partnership with Mexico. We need to go back to those policies. Let's hire more border agents. Let's defund those 87,000 IRS agents that they want to hire. Let's reappropriate that money to border agents. Let these three bills stand on their own. Let's put accountability where it needs to be placed, and let's support our allies, our strongest ally being Israel in the Middle East.
Well, I agree with everything you've said, and I'll tell you this. It's very troubling because I think our president, besides being incompetent and serious issues about his mental capacity, his intellectual capacity, pushing that aside, he's an absentee president. Now we found out, Jesse, that we had absentee Secretary of Defense. Now, unfortunately, the gentleman had treatment for prostate cancer, and I wish him well. But somebody should have been able to pick up the phone and tell the White House in this time of crisis worldwide, where we don't know who's going to make what move against whom. I mean, the Swedes, for example, are afraid that they're now talking about we've got to get ready because Russia may be coming after us next. So you have a tinderbox in the world. Everybody is itching to take advantage of the perceived weakness of the United States because of their ability to wreak havoc and our inability to face up to the fact that we really are in a state of war across the world, and we should be doing what's necessary. How many attacks do we have to have by the Houthis against international shipping before we go in there and you take out the Houthis? And you give all the armaments you need, which, by the way, the Biden administration took away from the Saudis, and say, Saudis, go out there, you fight with your army, we'll give you all the equipment and military equipment that you need to go out and wipe those the Saudis could take out the Houthis, give you everything you need, Saudis. But you have an absentee Secretary of Defense, and that's horrifying. And there was no chain of command. And you have to have a chain of command. So if he's not available, then the Deputy Secretary of State has to strike that. The Deputy Secretary of Defense has to be there. I mean, nobody was there. She was on vacation. He was in the hospital. The White House claims they didn't know. This is a very, very dangerous situation in very dangerous times. What say you?
I think, here's where I hope that the American people are actually being lied to. It's inconceivable to me that the Secretary of Defense is under anesthesia in surgery. The undersecretary, his deputy, is on vacation, and no one told the White House. Now, listen, I may not be happy with it, but we know what goes on. There are times you do not tell your enemies when parts of your military apparatus are down for a moment, whether it's an aircraft carrier, a submarine, or a Secretary of Defense. So if they did not want to publicize the fact that he was going under surgery, I have no issue with that. I have no quarrel with that. I don't want to give our enemies any heads up that we may have a chink or in our chain of command. But if it purposely happened where the deputy was on vacation, the Secretary of Defense is in surgery, and no one picked up the phone and called the White House to let them know, those individuals should be fired. They've broken their oath of office. They've placed this country in jeopardy. And what does that say for what the Pentagon believes and feels about the leadership and the ability for the White House to keep a secret? This is a symptom of a bigger disease, that there's lack of effectiveness, there's a lot of negligence, and there's a lack of trust.
I think that's right, Jesse. I think you hit it. So let me raise this issue with you. You know, we've talked about it a little bit before, but the more I think about it, the more I'm outraged by it. The New York State Legislature, the loony left, has passed this bill signed by Governor Hochul, who portrays himself as a common-sense Democrat, for a reparations commission. A reparations commission to give every African-American in the state of New York money, and then all kinds of a big lump sum amount, then plus money on an annual basis in perpetuity, and free this and free that and free whatever you want. I guess a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. I'm not quite sure. But, you know, they tried this gambit in California, and even Newsom had enough brains to realize, Jesse, that the numbers were staggering, was unworkable. He never admitted that this is the most divisive public policy you could ever have, is putting race against race. You have final words for this segment, Jesse.
This is nothing more. This just exasperates the divide we have. It's divisive. You know, what happens, it also sets unrealistic expectations, which further divides this country. And that's where it's wrong. That's what Democrats do. They speak to communities like the Hispanic community, the African-American community, and they say they're going to give them a helping hand, and they take them for granted and do nothing for them. And now they see African-Americans and Hispanic Americans and others, they see under the Trump administration and the Republican administration, their net worth rose, their unemployment fell to historic levels. This legislature and this governor should focus on real issues. This is a slap in the face to New Yorkers. Let's focus on crime and maybe repealing cashless bail. Let's provide tax reductions and tax stability here. We're already the highest tax state in the country. You know, let's fund our schools properly, because the COVID money that came from Donald Trump and the federal government.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.